All right, now I want to talk about the main motivation for doing a clinical trial and why it's considered to be a gold standard. It's because of this idea of pretest bias, data snooping, data mining, torturing the data until it tells you what you want. The idea that when we look at a bunch of numbers after the fact, we can justify almost anything. And so the purpose of a randomized clinical trial is to reduce the chances of these so-called false positives. And it's not necessarily to try to reduce fraud. I mean, there may be fraud in the industry, like in any other industry, but actually perfectly well-meaning, honest, ethical investigators can be fooled themselves because they desperately want to believe that their drug works, and patients' lives are often in the balance. So we're all emotionally invested in this. And if you're emotionally invested, one thing that we know is that human cognitive abilities are supremely adapted to engage in ex post justification. We see patterns even when patterns don't exist because that's what we're good at. We're good at identifying patterns. And I want to give you an illustration of this that is memorable. And the one that really struck me is this pattern that I came across years ago between the two presidents, Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy. How many of you know the parallels between Kennedy and Lincoln? Wow, most of you don't. Well, it turns out that for reasons that we still don't fully understand today, there is a very deep connection between these two presidents. I would say even eerie connections. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read to you, since I can't remember all of this on my own, I'm going to read to you facts about these two presidents. These are all true facts. And I want you to tell me how you react to them, what you think about this. So Lincoln and Kennedy were both presidents of the United States. But before that, Lincoln was elected to Congress in 1846. Kennedy was elected to Congress exactly 100 years later in 1946. Lincoln was elected to president in 1860, Kennedy in 1960. Lincoln had a secretary named Kennedy. Kennedy had a secretary named Lincoln. Both were particularly concerned with civil rights. Both of their wives lost their children while living in the White House. Both were shot in the head on a Friday before a holiday, Easter for Lincoln and Thanksgiving for Kennedy. And they were both seated next to their wives and another couple when they were shot. Neither died immediately. Both died at places with initials PH. Lincoln died at the Peterson House, and Kennedy died at Parkland Hospital. Lincoln sat in box 7 at Ford's Theater. Kennedy was riding in car number 7 when he was shot. And that car happened to be a Ford. It was a Lincoln Continental, made by Ford. Both were assassinated by Southerners. Both of these Southerners were born in the late 30s, and they were in their mid-20s when they committed their crimes. Both were known by 3 names, John Wilkes Booth, Lee Harvey Oswald, both 15 letters long. They were both 5'8", brown hair, hazel eyes. Both assassins were killed before they stood trial. Booth ran from a theater to a warehouse after shooting Lincoln. Oswald ran from a warehouse to a theater after shooting Kennedy. Both presidents were assassinated by Southerners. Both were succeeded by Southerners. Both of the successors were named Johnson, Andrew Johnson and Lyndon Johnson. Andrew Johnson was born in 1808, and Lyndon Johnson was born 100 years later in 1908. And finally, John Wilkes Booth was born in 1839, and Lee Harvey Oswald was born in 1939, exactly 100 years later. Eerie, huh? How many people, as I was reading this, actually got goosebumps listening to this? Yeah, it's human. It's weird. It's memorable. We gravitate towards this. Now, of course, how many other presidents did not have these patterns for which we look for patterns? You have to take those into account, and when you do, it turns out this is not at all unusual. But we gravitate towards the unusual, and when we focus on the unusual, that causes us to change our assessment of what is likely and what is not likely. Totally well-meaning people do this all the time. a study was done a few years ago that was published in Nature where a graduate student who had had a bad experience with a psychology experiment, he did an experiment, got really excited, wrote up the results, got the paper published, and a few years later he tried to replicate the results and he couldn't. And he got really discouraged, so he decided to look at this phenomenon, and he analyzed 98 published psychological studies in the top 3 psychology journals to see whether or not those studies could be replicated. And out of those 98, half of them could not be replicated. Now, there's always a statistical fluke that you might be getting an outlier, and so it's not necessarily due to anything devious, but a 50% probability of non-replication tells you that our perceptions actually somehow affect the conclusions in subtle ways. And the purpose of a randomized clinical trial is to prevent this from happening. Because if a drug gets approved that doesn't work, people can die from the side effects. This is not a matter of publishing false studies. It's a matter of life and death. So to do that, the FDA and other agencies around the world require certain things as part of a clinical trial. One of the most important things is endpoints. What are you looking for? Are you looking for a cure? Are you looking to extend life? Are you looking to shrink tumor size? You have to start with an endpoint, and that endpoint is going to be what you're judged by in advance. You know that, that's what you're going to be judged by, and that's what you start with. Okay? It's very often the case that you have a secondary endpoint, which may be another goal that you'd like to achieve, but it's not really the main focus, given the particular biology that you're targeting with your therapy. But it's important to put it all out there precisely because ex post justification is just too easy. And so this provides a check against that. Patient selection and accrual is also important. It's obviously easy to rig a study by picking patients in a certain way. So it's important to randomize your choice of patients, and even when you get the patients, to randomize whether they go into the treatment group or the control group. And there are lots of ways of doing this, some more expensive than others. If you want a truly randomized sample where you sample from the entire population of the United States, that's great. But in order to do that, you've actually got to figure out what all the distribution of patients might be and select from them as part of the natural population. That's expensive. What would be a lot easier is to say the first 20 people that walk through that door, we're going to ask them to participate. That's great if those 20 people are representative, but if they all came from a tour bus from Alaska and they all are from Inuit descent, you now have a very narrow slice of the population, which if they have the wrong genetic biomarker will actually invalidate your study for the general population. So selecting your sample is also critical. You have to be representative. You have to now do biomarker studies to see whether or not there are subsets of the population. It's more complicated than it was before, namely, and that means it's more expensive.